He didn't hire me for my résumé. He hired me because I had the wrong face. Or rather, the right one. The face of a dead man. And I said yes, because I had 42 coins in a jar and a leak-in pipe, and 30 years of being thoroughly, exhaustingly unremarkable. This is the story of how I walked into someone's grief and accidentally became something he never planned for. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, cream-colored, heavy stock, my full name in ink that cost more than my dinner had the night before. No return address, just a name, Devon Lorne, and an instruction to arrive at his estate Thursday at noon. No explanation of what the job was. I read it 5 times. Made tea. Read it again. I went. The Lorne estate sat on the North Hill of Caldenmore, behind iron gates and trees so old their branches had grown into each other overhead, making a cathedral out of the path to the house. I was shown into a study lined floor to ceiling with books, pointed at a chair, and left alone to feel small in it. Then Devon Lorne walked in and stopped seeing me before he even reached his chair. He saw someone else. I watched it happen, the way his eyes found my face and went completely still. The way a person goes still when a song they thought they'd forgotten starts playing somewhere unexpected. It lasted 2 seconds before he smoothed it over, crossed the room, sat down, and folded his hands on the desk like a man very practiced at controlling his face. But I had seen it. I filed it away. He was direct. His partner had died 2 years ago, an Omega named Kale. He said it plainly, without reaching for softer words, which told me he had made peace with the sentence, even if not the fact. People who'd seen me said the resemblance was significant, enough to stop a room. The position, live-in companion, attend events, be present. The salary was more than I made in a full year at the archive. I sat with it. I understood what it actually meant to be chosen because I looked like someone's grief, to exist in a man's house as a living photograph of a person I'd never met, to be seen through, always, like light through glass, landing on something behind me. I had spent 30 years being that kind of glass for people without being paid for it. At least this version came with a salary. I almost said no anyway. There was a part of me, quieter than pride but steadier, that said you are worth being seen directly. Then I thought about the 42 coins. I said yes. But first I said my condition, and I said it clearly. I would not answer to Kale's name. I would not imitate his patterns, or let myself be shaped into a costume of a man I'd never known. I would be present. I would be kind. I would hold up every part of this arrangement. But I would do all of it as Soren. Fully, only, completely as Soren. Non-negotiable. Devon looked at me across the desk for a long moment. Agreed, he said. Quietly, like a door closing on something. I moved in on Saturday with 2 bags, and a strange feeling in my chest I chose not to examine too closely. The first weeks were manageable. Devon wasn't warm exactly, but he had a specific consideration that never wavered. He made sure I knew where things were without making me feel foolish, included me at dinner without demanding I perform, never hovered or positioned himself as my rescuer. For a man operating from grief, he had surprisingly good manners about the whole thing. But he looked at me the way people look at photographs, that half-second pause before his eyes fully settled, searching my face for Kale before finding me instead. Every time, I had agreed to this. I told myself every morning that the flicker was his business, and my feelings about it were mine to manage quietly. I managed them quietly. It was fine. Then Pel Avros arrived and made everything more complicated in a completely different direction. Pell was a family friend, which in practice meant he visited whenever he liked and moved through the estate with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been made to feel unwelcome anywhere. Maybe 28, broad-shouldered, gold-haired, with a laugh that arrived before he did. His warmth was so immediate and so consistent that I spent the first 2 visits looking for the seams, because warmth that never adjusted for the room always had seams somewhere. He noticed me on his second visit. After that, he always specifically noticed me. He called me the quiet one with a grin that made it sound like a compliment. He touched my shoulder when he passed, brief, easy, readable as friendly and nothing more. He remembered things I said in passing, a book I mentioned once, the tea I preferred, small details most people would let fall through. Each time he produced these things, there was warmth to it that felt like generosity. There was also, underneath the generosity, a faint current of notice how well I pay attention to you. I noticed something else. His kindness was always slightly amplified when Devon was in the room, just enough to be visible without looking performed. I stored that alongside the rest and kept watching. Miri, Devon's head of household, a beta woman in her 50s, with the directness of someone who'd seen too much to bother softening things, told me one evening that Pell liked me. She said it the way you say, it might rain. Not a judgment, just weather. Is that good or bad? I asked. She made a sound that was somehow both a warning and a shrug, handed me a cup of tea, and left. 6 weeks in, when the evenings changed, Devon began appearing in whatever room I was reading in, not announced, not explained. He would arrive with 2 cups of tea, sit in the chair nearest the window, open whatever he was working on, and simply exist in the same space as me. The first time it happened, I waited for him to say something that needed saying. He didn't. He just read. So I kept reading, and after a while we talked, and the conversation was easy in a way I hadn't expected from someone so controlled during the day. I learned things about him in those evenings that felt like finding rooms in a house you thought you knew. He was quietly, unexpectedly funny. The dry kind that caught you off guard and made you laugh before you'd decided whether to. He had spent years being told he was too serious and had eventually built it into architecture until the seriousness was just how he was shaped. He had loved Kale for 7 years. He said once, very quietly, that the 2 years since had felt like trying to read a book with half the pages torn out. I asked if he thought he'd ever read a whole one again. He looked at me, actually considering it, not reaching for the safe answer, and said he was starting to think the next book might be written differently, by someone he hadn't anticipated. I didn't ask him to explain. I kept it somewhere careful and told myself firmly not to let it mean more than it probably did. Then one night I was reading a history of old northern trade routes, mostly dry, occasionally extraordinary, and I found a passage about sailors who used to leave carved wooden fish at the harbor on their last night home. 1 fish for every person they loved, so that if the voyage took them and they never came back, the fish would remain, and the people they loved would know they had been counted. I read it out loud to Devon without really planning to. He went quiet. Then, that's the saddest thing I've heard in a long time. I've been thinking about it for 3 days, I said. He looked at me, and there was no flicker, no photograph pause, no searching for someone behind my eyes. Just Devon, sitting across from me in the evening light, reacting to exactly what I had said. Nothing else. Only me. It lasted a moment before he looked back at his book, but I noticed it. I held it the way you hold something small and fragile. Not tightly, not loosely, just carefully, with both hands, making sure it didn't fall. 4 months in, Devon stopped doing the thing with his eyes. I noticed the exact morning it happened. Breakfast, east window, clean white light. I came down later than usual. Miri had trimmed my hair the evening before, and Devon looked up from his paper and said, "You cut your hair?" And there was nothing underneath it. No pause, no flicker, no half-second of searching my face for someone who wasn't there. Just a man, looking at me. I poured my tea, said yes. Miri had done it. He said it looked good, and went back to his paper. I sat there with my cup warm between my hands, and felt something move through my chest that I absolutely refused to name, because naming it would mean admitting that a 4-month arrangement I'd walked into with zero illusions had become something I cared about. I was not ready to look at that directly, and so I drank my tea. I was very, very careful. The evenings had become the best part. That was the thing I hadn't budgeted for. I had prepared for distance, politeness, the manageable sadness of being looked through. I had not prepared for Devon appearing in the library at 9 with 2 cups of tea and something dry and unexpected that made me put my book down and actually laugh. I had not prepared for conversations that unspooled slowly, with no agenda, no performance. The kind that only happen when 2 people have quietly stopped being careful with each other without either of them deciding to. He told me once he had always been bad at asking for things. That asking meant admitting you didn't already have it, and growing up a lorn meant lack of any kind was a character failure. He said it lightly. I heard the shape underneath, years of need, carried in silence until it compressed into just part of the weight he moved through every day. I told him I understood, not as consolation, because I genuinely did. He looked at me, really looked, and said, "You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone easier to keep at a distance," he said. I thought about that long after he went to bed. I thought about it the next morning. I was still thinking about it when Pell arrived. Pell had been visiting 4 times a month, and every single time he found a reason to be alone with me. Never long. Just enough. A comment, a small gift, careful attention delivered, and then he'd move on, his warmth filling the rest of the room like weather. The gifts had escalated. When the tea had become a first edition of a poet I'd mentioned once in passing, the book had become 2 books, wrapped. Always that same current underneath the warmth. See how closely I listen. See what Devon will never think to do. One afternoon, he found me in the garden and sat beside me on the low stone wall, like a man who'd happened upon exactly what he was looking for. "He talks about you differently now," Pell said, looking out at the garden. I kept my eyes on the middle distance. "Does he?" "Like someone he started to need. He positions himself near you at every event. Spent 2 years barely speaking at social functions." He paused. "I wonder if he knows he's doing it." "Why are you telling me this?" He turned and his expression was entirely sincere. That was the thing about Pell. His sincerity never looked performed, which made him the most dangerous kind of person because he was never fully lying. Because you should know what it is before you feel too much. He's not falling for you, Soren. He's falling for the relief of someone who doesn't ask him to be over it yet. The moment you need something from him instead of just giving, that relief disappears, and you'll find out quickly what you actually were. I looked at him. "And what would I be to you?" He smiled. It was a good smile. A beginning, not a replacement. He squeezed my shoulder and walked back to the house like a man satisfied with how things had landed. I sat in the garden turning it over. not because it had convinced me, but because the best manipulations carry something true, and I wanted to find exactly where the truth ended and the architecture began. Well, I found out on a Thursday. Miri came to my room after dinner with the expression of someone who has been carrying something uncomfortable and finally decided sitting with it alone is worse. She closed the door. She told me Pell had visited 3 senior members of Caldenmore's upper council over the past 2 weeks. Quietly, framed as concern. He'd told them about the arrangement, said he was worried about Davon, suggested someone with standing should say something before it became a problem for the Lorne name. He hadn't been cruel. That was the craft of it. By the 5th retelling, it had nothing to do with Devon's grief. It was a story about me, an Omega who'd engineered access to a legacy family through grief's back door. Calculating. Deliberate. Every version more certain than the last. I sat with the shape of it. Pell had stood in my garden, warned me about the fire, and gone directly to the people most likely to light it. He'd handed me the warning while arranging the kindling. That was elegant, in the way truly awful things sometimes are. "Thank you," I said to Miri. At the door, she paused. "He's been here every week since you arrived," she said. "He has never brought Davon tea." Then she left. Davon came that same evening. He stood in the doorway of the sitting room where I was pretending to read and said, without preamble, "I need to ask you something directly." "All right. The story going around. I need to know if any of it is true." His voice was controlled, his jaw tight in the way of someone working very hard to stay fair. I could see him reaching for distance, the old reflex of it. Step back. The grief is familiar. Grief doesn't ask anything you haven't already survived. I put my book down. "No. Your people found me. A letter came. I came to an interview. You told me exactly what the arrangement was. I set a condition. You agreed. And I've kept my word every single day since." "I know that," he said quietly. "Then why are you standing in the doorway asking me?" It landed cleanly. Not an accusation, a genuine question. He was quiet. Then he came into the room properly, sat down, looked at his hands. Because I let myself wonder for half a second. And the fact that I did, about someone I've spent 4 months talking to every evening, means I was looking for a reason to step back. He paused. I do that. When something starts to matter more than I planned for, I look for the exit. The room was very still. "I'm not Cale," I said. "Why, I will never be him, and I don't want to be. I can't keep being the shape your grief rests in, while you decide whether I'm safe to actually know. If I'm here, I need to be here, because you want Soren, specifically, not the outline of someone else." He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw it, the thing that had been building for weeks in the evenings, in the 2 cups of tea, and someone easier to keep at a distance, cracking open just slightly at the edges. "I know," he said, slowly, with weight, like a man saying something he'd known for a while and was only now letting out of his hands. We sat in the quiet after that, not talking, not fixing anything, just 2 people in the same room with the truth of it between them. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do, but lying in the dark that night, and I understood the decision had nothing to do with Devon. It had to do with me, what I was worth to myself, separate from any arrangement, any house on a hill, any man learning or not learning to see me. It had taken me 30 years to ask that question clearly. I wasn't going to waste the answer. But I also knew, with a certainty I couldn't talk myself out of, that the next time Davon Lorne looked at me across a quiet room, I wasn't going to look away first. and from the way he'd looked at me tonight, I didn't think he was either. Miri found me first. She came to my room after dinner, closed the door, sat down. No preamble. That was Miri's way. She told me Pell had visited 3 senior members of Caldenmore's upper council over the past 2 weeks, quietly, framed as concern. He'd told them about the arrangement, said he was worried about Devon, suggested someone with standing should say something before it became a problem for the Lorne name. He hadn't been cruel. That was the craft of it. By the 5th retelling, it had nothing to do with Devon's grief. It was a story about me, an Omega who'd engineered access to a legacy family through grief's back door. Calculating. Deliberate. Every version more certain than the last. Details added that nobody had witnessed. Miri finished and looked at me steadily. I sat with the shape of it. Pell had stood in my garden, warned me about the fire, and gone directly to the people most likely to light it. Handed me the warning while arranging the kindling. "Thank you," I said. At the door, she paused. "He's been here every week since you arrived." A beat. He has never brought Devon tea. She left. I didn't move for a long time. I found Pell in the east sitting room before he could find me. He looked up, easy and warm, already assembling his smile. I didn't give him time to use it. "You went to the council," I said. A half-second recalibration. Then, "I was concerned." "You told me Devon would discard me the moment I became inconvenient," I said. "Then you went and made me inconvenient. That's not concern. That's a move." Something shifted in his face, the performance dropping just enough to show what lived underneath. Not malice, a worse, certainty. "He's replacing Cale with you, and he doesn't even know it. That's not yours to manage. Someone has to. He's a grown man," I said. "What you did wasn't about Devon. It was about the fact that he stopped needing you to be the person who checked on him. And you couldn't stand it." Pell's jaw tightened. Once. Then the warmth resealed itself, smoother this time. "You're sharper than you look." "I know," I said. "That's the part you miscalculated." I left him there. What I didn't know was that Devon had been in the hallway. He told me later he hadn't meant to overhear. He'd been coming to find me. Had been coming to find me since that morning, since he'd woken up and understood with the particular clarity that only arrives after a sleepless night exactly what the past 4 months had actually been. He'd rounded the corner and heard my voice through the half-open door and stopped. He heard all of it. He came to the garden afterward, where I'd gone to think. He came around the corner and stopped when he saw me, like he'd half expected I wouldn't be there. "I owe you an apology," he said. "You already apologized. Not for this." He crossed the garden and sat beside me on the wall, close. I've known Pell for 11 years. He was there when Cale died. He was at the funeral. He sat with me for 3 days after. His voice was controlled, but his hands weren't. Fingers pressed flat against the stone wall, like he needed something solid. And he's been doing this the entire time. "Yes," I said. "He came to me 2 days ago," Devon said. "Said he was worried about me. Said he thought the arrangement had become unhealthy, that you had become too comfortable here." I told him he was wrong. A pause. He smiled and said he hoped so. "He planted the seed anyway," I said. "He planted it everywhere." His jaw tightened. "I made some calls this morning. The council members. I wanted to understand what they'd actually been told." He looked at me. Soren. The story he built. It was detailed. It wasn't a worry he shared once over dinner. It was a campaign. The garden was very still. "I know," I said. "He used Cale. His voice dropped. He used the fact that you look like him, made it sound calculated, like you'd researched it, engineered it, like you'd found a grieving alpha and made yourself into exactly what he'd reach for. He stopped, exhaled. The cruelest part is that's the version people believe, because it's easier than the truth. What's the truth? He looked at me directly. That I hired you. That I was the one who sent the letter. That you set a condition I agreed to, and you've kept your word every single day. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, I stopped looking for Kale in your face and started looking for you. He paused. And Pell saw it happening before I did. And that's what he couldn't tolerate. I held his gaze. What are you going to do? I already did it. Something cold moved through his expression. Not anger, which burns, but something that cuts. I called the council members myself this morning, told them the arrangement was made at my direction, under my full understanding, and that anyone who had concerns about the Lorne name was welcome to bring them to me directly. A pause. Then I called Pell, and I told him he was no longer welcome at this estate. The oak was still. No wind. Just Devon on the wall beside me, watching my face like the answer to something was written there. He said I was making a mistake, Devon said. That I was letting you isolate me from people who actually cared about me. His mouth curved. Not warmth. Something harder. I told him the people who actually care about me don't build fires and then offer to help me put them out. I looked at him for a long moment. You heard everything, I said. Everything. Including what I said to him. Including what you said to him. His voice shifted, the hardness softening into something I didn't have a word for yet. Something that had been building for months in evening libraries and 2 cups of tea and conversations that ran too long. You told him he miscalculated, that the part he got wrong was how sharp you were. He paused. He did miscalculate. He thought you were someone I was using. He didn't understand you were someone I was. He stopped. Someone you were... What? I said quietly. He looked at me the way he had at breakfast when I came down with shorter hair, and there was no flicker, no photograph pause, no searching for someone behind my eyes. Just Devon, looking at me. Someone I was becoming dependent on, he said. In the way that has nothing to do with grief and everything to do with you. Specifically, the way you read slower so the evenings last longer. A beat. Yes, I noticed. My chest did the thing I'd stopped pretending wasn't happening. Devon, I'm not asking you for anything, he said. I just needed you to know that what he built was a lie. That I know what this is. That you are not a replacement, and you have never been one. And anyone who says otherwise will answer to me directly. He held my gaze. You came here as Soren. You stayed as Soren. That's who I... Another stop. Then quietly. That's who I want here. The garden was very still. I've been reading slower, I said. He almost smiled. I know. We sat on the wall without touching, without resolving anything. Just 2 people with the truth, finally out in the open. The betrayal named and handled. The grief no longer the biggest thing in the room. It wasn't an ending, but the villain had been removed from the story. And for the first time since I arrived with 2 bags and a strange feeling in my chest, the house felt like somewhere I might actually stay. Betrayal. Healing. And the moment someone finally chooses you. Not your face, not your resemblance, not your usefulness. Just you. If this story found you, save it. Share it. Someone in your life needs to read it.